Hello and welcome to 10 Points of Slashing. My name is SJ, and today we are going to be doing a 10-point review of Blizzard's loot-driven, live service, fantasy action RPG cash cow, Diablo IV. It's no secret that I absolutely love this game, but given the discourse around it, I wanted to take a more analytical approach to talking about why I love it. People, irrationally fucking hate this game, so I wanted to make sure I do my due diligence in hitting it with as much of a magnifying glass as I possibly can. In this review, we'll be keeping it as objective as possible by analyzing 5 major categories of the game, breaking these things up into 2 subcategories, and asking yes or no questions to determine whether or not the game gets a point in each category. So for a 10-point review, a 7 out of 10 means it actually scored 7 points out of a possible 10, which is honestly a really good score, instead of 7 out of 10 meaning this is the worst game that's come out in the past 10 years, but it was fine and we need sponsorship money, so 7 sounds good, I guess. Ladies and gentlemen, strap yourselves in because we are jumping right into it. Let's talk loot, demons, killing, and cucking in Diablo IV. Normally, I kick off these reviews by discussing the story, because story is the most important thing to me about a video game, especially when it comes to fantasy RPGs. However, this is a fantasy RPG that I'd be willing to bet not many people play for story. I'm reasonably sure that I'm in the minority here, so instead, we'll open up by discussing what I think most people come to Diablo for: gameplay. The first category that we'll discuss for gameplay, probably the most important thing for any action RPG, is the game fun. What makes it fun? Normally, I stay away from this kind of shit, but I'd like to talk about one of the biggest complaints about Diablo IV here. The complaint that I've actually heard the most often when discussing Diablo IV with people that hate it. I'd like to talk about it because it directly opposes one of the biggest reasons that I find Diablo IV to be insanely fun. In order to talk about that complaint, we have to talk about meta builds. If you don't know what a meta build is, allow me to explain in the simplest terms I can come up with. Using a meta build or online build guide is when you let some other dude play the game for you and then tell you exactly how to play the game. It's cucking, but for video games. Most of the fun in Diablo IV, for me, comes from having a character in mind that has a set of established skills and abilities and shaping Diablo IV around that character. As an easy example here, I know I want to build a Diablo 3 Demon Hunter type of character, so as I play the game and level up, I choose active and passive skills that reflect that. And as I build and experiment with that character, I find skills and abilities that maybe I didn't consider before, but that make sense for that character. Eventually, I get into the end game where I realize that some of those skills and abilities aren't really doing much for me anymore, so I shift my approach while endeavoring to stick with the theme of my character. Experimenting with builds and learning what does and doesn't work with my characters is the fun of Diablo IV, and if I used a build guide, I would lose half of the reason that I love this game. Arguing that the game isn't fun, is repetitive, or that there's nothing to do once you get to the end game, this is like the kids that would buy a Prima strategy guide for a puzzle game, beat the game in an hour using that guide, and then complain that the game sucked because the puzzles were too easy. This game is so much more fun if you go in blind and play what you want to play, the character that you want to be, instead of playing a character that somebody else made. If you do that and still have the same complaints, great. You're entitled to your opinion. Maybe the game just isn't for you, man. For somebody that loves seeing people have fun, it's really frustrating watching people shoot themselves in the foot with this game and then complain that they got shot in the foot. Now, when they do it hundreds or 1,406.3 times, let's say, and still complain, at that point, it's obvious that they're just completely full of shit. But suffice it to say that for me, the point is absolutely awarded to Diablo IV for being fun, for the fun of building a character, as well as a number of additional reasons that we will discuss throughout the rest of this review. For the next category, we'll discuss another heavily contested point of Diablo 4's gameplay. Is the game challenging? Is that challenge artificial? or does it create real tension in the player that they feel compelled to overcome? This is something that people have complained about since launch. They've complained that it's too easy. They've complained that it's too hard. They've complained that you level up too fast. They've complained that you level up too slow. This is not a Dr. Seuss book. This is just how it's been. Because Blizzard keeps listening to people. Now, I could go into a whole rant here about how there's something to be said for a developer that listens and makes adjustments based on player feedback, but that I think sometimes there are cases where it's better to stick to a hard-line design intention, but that's not what this video is about. We're talking about the presence and quality of challenge in Diablo IV here, and I say all of this to illustrate the fact that that presence and quality has been fluctuating for the game's entire lifetime. Why do people look for challenge in video games to begin with? When there's tension in a moment, uncertainty but confidence, that feeling is why I like challenge, and it feels good to overcome that challenge, to push through that tension and come out on top. To feel like you're working towards something and then accomplish it. To talk shit to your buddies and lay down the gauntlet to them, and then celebrate with them when they overcome that challenge. It's all part of video game culture. And Diablo IV has that in the form of hardcore mode. The possibility of permadeath creates tension even in the lowest difficulty setting. Knowing that one wrong step can just delete hours worth of progress is what makes Souls games so insanely compelling and fun. That sense of tension is just unreal, and I absolutely get that feeling in hardcore Diablo 4. Challenge is not the same thing from game to game. Myst was challenging for entirely different reasons than Crash Bandicoot, if you're old enough to remember that. Baseball is challenging for different reasons than basketball. However, all of this is to say that I will not be awarding the point to Diablo 4 for challenge. Regardless of the tension that hardcore mode brings to the table, what's happening in hardcore mode is not challenge or difficulty, it's just risk and punishment. The challenge that Diablo 4 does feature in its moment-to-moment gameplay is completely artificial. All the game does is increase numbers, higher enemy health and damage output, rather than increasing the challenge itself by emphasizing mastery over the game's combat mechanics. An argument could definitely be made here that the challenge in Diablo 4 comes from keeping up with gear and maximizing your potential with skills and abilities. That the challenge is there rather than in the combat. But I personally just can't award the point here for this reason alone. I constantly find myself wishing there was another mode where enemy damage output was increased but enemy health was not. Something that was more punishing without entirely erasing my character if I make a mistake. In fact, when it comes to the difficulty of Diablo 4, there's all kinds of shit that I could suggest in that regard. But there comes a point when we're not making suggestions for Diablo 4 anymore. We're just suggesting an entirely new game. But I digress. To wrap up this section, I'll say this. Diablo 4 is fun as hell, but it is absolutely missing a sense of challenge in its moment-to-moment gameplay that isn't just cranking numbers up. The next section we'll jump into and discuss is the game's story. Like I said at the top, for me, story is the most important thing to a video game, and here's why. If a game's story is compelling and interesting enough, I'll push through gameplay that I may not even like just to see the story through to the end. I've learned to love entire genres that I normally wouldn't because a game presented a kick-ass story to me that made me learn to love the gameplay. So let's break Diablo 4's story down into the two major categories and see if it holds up. The first category we'll discuss for story is the game's characters. Does the game present characters with unique personalities and character development, and does the game make us care about these people? The theme of the game is hatred, and this theme is reflected and highlighted in every single one of its major characters, regardless of whose side they're on. And something I find really interesting is that the only character in the game to work through and even get close to attempting to heal his hatred dies at the end of the game. And this character is who I think is the most compelling character in Diablo 4. let's talk a bit about Donan and a few of the issues that I have with the character narratives in this game. Donan is a former Haradrim, and was part of a group of adventurers that took down the demon Astaroth long before the events of Diablo IV. He and 2 druids fought against Astaroth during a period of time known as the Days of Ash, when Skazglen was torn apart by this demon as he rampaged through it, leaving fear and chaos in his wake. Eventually, Donan and his companions managed to seal Astaroth within a soulstone and buried it deep underground at the edge of the Skazglen wilderness, where he built Eldheim Keep to stand watch over it for all time. It's a pretty cool story, right? But I do have a major issue with how this story was told in Diablo IV, and more specifically, who the story was told about. I think this entire story would have been so much more compelling if it were Lorath that suffered and overcame the loss that Donan did instead. Donan is a brand new character to Diablo, and Lorath is not. For those that played Reaper of Souls, the Diablo 3 expansion that introduced Lorath, they have an immediate connection to one of the first characters they meet in Diablo 4. Not only would I find the story more compelling overall with the Lorath-Donan swap, I think having more references to the fact that Lorath is an established Diablo character just adds more intrigue and depth in general. And if they took that and then did something with it, really tugged at the player's heartstrings with him, I don't know, man. I'm not a writer, so I may be way off the mark here, but with all of that said, I will still absolutely award the point for Diablo 4's characters. Despite my suggested changes, I still find Lorath and Donan to be 2 incredibly compelling characters that honestly carry the entire narrative of the game for me. And as I said, each of them really embodies the game's theme of hatred in completely different ways, and I really dig the creativity in the storytelling there. For the next category in story, conflict. The problem that the game presents to you, the player, to solve. Diablo 4's conflict is clearly communicated to the player, and motivation is established pretty much right off the bat, with the game's central narrative being you and a self-exiled member of a fallen order of mages whose purpose was to protect the world from the lords of hell, chasing down the daughter of the eldest of those lords and mother of the human race itself as she attempts to usurp her father and take control of the legions of hell by empowering and enslaving humanity in order to launch a suicide offensive against heaven in an attempt to end the eternal conflict between both. Dog, if your dick isn't hard by now, I don't know what to tell you. In all seriousness, there are 2 things that I really love about Diablo 4's conflict, and the first is the presentation of it. The way that the world's history is introduced to the player over the course of the story encourages you to look deeper into it if you don't already know the history, without things feeling overwhelming or like so many bad fantasy stories that are just capitalized nouns and names of places and events and people that you don't know or care about, but they're presented to you in a way that assumes you do. This is a story that has depth without being pretentious, and all of the relevant information is presented as it becomes necessary for the player's understanding and immersion into the story. I think it's really well done. Whether you like the story or conflict is obviously for you to decide, but I found myself incredibly interested and invested in it in no small part due to the presentation of it. The second thing that I love about Diablo 4's conflict is the moral grayness of it all. Lilith, the game's sort of representative of the Burning Hells, Inarius, the game's representative of the High Heavens, and Lorath, the game's representative of Sanctuary, all want the same thing at the end of the day: an end to the eternal conflict. The difference is how each of these characters plans to achieve that end. And the game asks an age-old question that I personally find fascinating and love exploring in video games: do the ends justify the means? Ultimately, what Lilith wants is to elevate and save humanity. This is a good thing, but as Lorath brings up throughout the course of the story, the path that she carves to humanity's salvation is littered with bodies and drenched in blood. It's this kind of moral back and forth, this gray area, that absolutely captivates me anytime I see it in video games, and when it's executed properly, it's just incredible, man. Diablo IV gets the point for conflict, and that wraps up story. At the top of this section, I mentioned that I've learned to love entire genres that I normally wouldn't because of one game's phenomenal story, and that's exactly what happened with Diablo IV. This game's story absolutely hooked me. From that batshit crazy intro cutscene to Lorath and Donan, all the way to an insanely strong last act, I could not put the game down. Which brings us to the game's mechanics. In this section, we'll be analyzing the nitty-gritties that drive the gameplay experience. Instead of asking, is the game fun and challenging, we'll be asking why the game is fun and challenging. To do this, we'll be taking a look at the game's systems and the things that it asks you to do as the player, and asking two major questions. With the first of these questions being, do the game's nitty-gritties bring meaning and value to the overall gameplay experience? Are the gameplay systems and mechanics just there to be there, or do they actually add something to the game that makes it stand out in some way? I have already talked at length about one thing in particular that Diablo IV has going for it that absolutely crushes this category, and that thing is respite and resupply. I don't like wasting people's time by saying the same things over and over again in content, so I'll link the last video here and give a timestamp so that if you're interested, you can check it out. But to summarize what I'm talking about here, an absolutely crucial part of Diablo 4's gameplay is stopping in town to manage equipment, upgrade potions, etc. What this does is force the player to have to take a break from the game's combat in order to dig into what is probably the most important mechanic in any Diablo game, keeping up with your gear. And the fact that you have to stop in town to do this adds a sense of immersion in the world. If you lean into the fact that you can say things like, I hope this village nearby has an occultist, if not, we may need to make a trip back to the capital. Come on, man, it feels cool to say nerdy shit like that, and if you let your RPG nerd flag fly there, it adds so much value to the experience. Point awarded for meaning and value in the gameplay systems that Diablo 4 features based on respite and resupply alone. The next question we'll ask for mechanics is, do the game's nitty-gritties feel rewarding to the player? I'm not talking about a sense of pride and accomplishment here, that will come later. Instead, I'm referring to a more mundane type of reward. What we're asking here is if the game appeals to the Neanderthal in all of us that just wants to push button, feel good. These things that just immediately speak to your basest senses and reward you in the moment. Push button, feel good. Does Diablo 4 have anything that does this for the player? The answer here is an obvious and resounding yes. This franchise was built on that feeling. In fact, I'd probably argue that Diablo is the inspiration for that feeling in modern gaming. Diablo pioneered the loot-driven gameplay loop that we all know and sometimes love, and they made it feel rewarding with cool sound effects and bright colors. This is why people chase uniques and mythics and feel compelled to equip them and make them part of their build, even when they sometimes may not necessarily fit. Diablo as a franchise is the master of push button feel good, and Diablo 4 is no exception. Point awarded here. And that wraps up mechanics. Obviously, I didn't touch on everything that Diablo 4 has to offer as far as its mechanics go, but even with what little I did talk about, it absolutely does enough to check these boxes for me. Moving right along, the next section is the game's replayability. Does the game make you want to come back and play it more? We'll start this section off by asking this: can you come back and take a different approach to the game? When reviewing RPGs, I'm typically a little harsher here than I would be with other games, simply due to the fact that a core feature of an RPG is class-based gameplay, meaning that by design, the game offers multiple different approaches to play the game. So, for an RPG, I ask, do those approaches actually feel different? The concept of push button feel good is gonna come back up here. An argument that I hear pretty regularly is that Diablo in general as a franchise just feels like clicking monsters no matter what class you play, especially once you get to endgame. And I disagree with that for the most part, due to how I play RPGs. I lean into whatever class I play. When I play a barbarian, I'm charging into the middle of the fray and staying there until everything is torn apart. When I play a druid, I defend the little animals running around and say the most nature-loving shit. When I play a rogue, I'm dashing across the battlefield like a husky with the zoomies. I roleplay in my role-playing games. And if a game has systems in place that support that role-playing, like giving barbarians a group of brawling skills that improve their ability to be in the fight, and giving rogues a group of mobility skills that allow them to move through and around the fight, things that make these classes feel like they are these classes and not just text that says Barb or Rogue, I will feel the difference. And regardless of the feeling side of this, even if you look at the classes analytically and logistically, each of them builds differently. There is a natural and intrinsic encouragement in Diablo 4 to come back, play the game over again, and take a different approach to it. Point awarded. Next in replayability, we'll talk about EA's favorite category, the sense of accomplishment and pride. A lot of the time, this will go hand in hand with challenge, which we've already discussed. Overcoming a challenge makes you feel good, fills you with pride, makes you feel accomplished, and encourages you to talk shit to your friends. But because this is universal when it comes to overcoming a challenge, I like to ask, does the game offer any other sense of accomplishment and pride that isn't married to the challenge, that encourages replayability specifically? Something that makes you want to play the game more. I always discuss achievements here, and yeah, the achievements are okay for Diablo 4, nothing to write home about by any means. I did find a few things that I actually had to dig into the game and play it beyond how I normally would play it in order to get the achievement, but I can't award the point here for the achievements alone. A lot of them are just too easy, really simple things to do like the class-specific stuff. However, I'd like to take a little step back here and point to the outrageous amount of elitism in the Diablo 4 player base. In discussions about this game, people say things like, oh, you just played through the story and only got to level 50? You didn't actually play the game then. And, oh, you only got to Paragon 150? You didn't actually play the game then. And, oh, you never got to Torment 4? You didn't actually play the game then. And so on. The goalposts are constantly moving. Elitism is born of pride. People look down on other people because they feel like they've accomplished something that the plebs just haven't. The term casuals exists because of that elitism. To say that Diablo 4's gameplay features a sense of accomplishment and pride is a massive understatement. Point awarded. And that closes out replayability. For our final section, we'll be discussing engagement. Does the game keep you locked in? Does it keep your focus on the gameplay experience? We'll open up engagement with the obvious subcategory, is the game generally immersive? I'll say this. That last Diablo 4 video that the channel did is pretty much just me talking about this category alone for 15 minutes straight. So again, in keeping with the spirit of me not rehashing old content over and over again, I'll summarize here. Respite and resupply in towns gives me a huge sense of immersion, making me legitimately feel like a wandering adventurer that needs to stop in town to rest between excursions. The gorgeous and, more importantly, consistent art direction across the entire game just naturally pulls you into it, and the way the story is presented encourages players to just dive into the world. In a game that is built on some of the most video gamey shit I've ever seen, it's honestly impressive to me how well this game was able to immerse me in it. I will say that turning off combat numbers and error messages is absolutely crucial to get that immersion out of Diablo 4, but nonetheless, point awarded. And I swear this is the last time I'll mention it, but if you want to hear more of my reasoning for this category, check out that last video. And for the last category in the review before moving on to final scoring, is the game paced well? I'm not talking about narrative pacing. I'm talking about gameplay pacing. How do the major gameplay elements communicate with and complement each other? In order to answer this, we need to establish what the major gameplay elements are for Diablo 4. First and foremost, combat. Clearing dungeons is the soul of Diablo, but you can't clear dungeons if you're not keeping up with inventory management. Loot is the heart of Diablo, the lifeblood that drives the entire experience. And lastly, managing your build, your skills and abilities. This is the body of Diablo, something you should spend a lot of time working on because it's what's going to get you through the entire experience. So, how well are each of these things balanced against the others? I would say tremendously well. And again, I'll point to respite and resupply here. The game encourages the player to make periodic trips back to town to manage inventory, and as you manage inventory, aspects and affixes encourage the player to dig into their build. It's a system that feeds itself in some really creative ways to create an incredible sense of balance. Everything contributes to making everything else better without feeling exhaustive or excessive in any way. I will award the final point in the review for Diablo 4's pacing. So, ladies and gentlemen, the final score for this 10-point review of Diablo 4, a 9 out of 10. And although this is a nearly perfect score, I do want to emphasize here that this does not mean that I think the game is nearly perfect. All this means is that Diablo 4 checks most of my personal boxes, the things that make me really love a game. In fact, I'd go so far as to say that Diablo 4 is far from perfect. For a lot of reasons. There are so many things that I wish this game had or did better, which is why for every 10-point review, I also give what I call the emotional rating. We just spent 30 minutes analyzing a piece of art. Art is meant to be appreciated and enjoyed and emotioned about. So this is where I do that. And for Diablo 4, the emotional rating that I'd give it is a good and solid 8 out of 10. It is, by its nature, repetitive. It's intended in the design of the game. Push button, feel good. It's a simple concept and a simple gameplay loop. And once you get tired of that loop, it kinda gets old, and you wanna move on to something a little more engaging, a little less isometric, something like Oblivion Remastered. But to wrap this one up, I'm gonna level with you guys and sort of eschew the channel's governing principle for the next few minutes. I think a lot of people only hate the game because it's cool to hate it. Because their favorite streamer says he doesn't like it, so they just parrot his reasons for hating it. If your reason for hating Diablo 4 is Blizzard's business practices or monetization systems, then it isn't Diablo 4 that you hate. This is like saying you don't like a restaurant's sushi because the restaurant asks if you want something to drink with it. And it isn't fair to the massive numbers of people that base their purchasing decisions on reviews that you left, saying that the game is bad when you just have a personal disagreement with the developers or have some insane and unreasonable expectation for content delivery every season. And you've robbed them of what could be an awesome gameplay experience. Reviews based solely on outrage are a very real problem in gaming right now. That's not to say that there aren't people that have legitimate complaints about it and genuinely don't like the game, but these aren't the people that hang out in r/Diablo 4 every day. These aren't the people review bombing it. These aren't the people in every comment section on every YouTube video about the game. These people out there that genuinely don't like Diablo 4 are not playing the game, and they're not hanging out in online forums talking about the game because they don't like it, and that's okay. People are allowed to love the things that they love and hate the things that they hate, but if I hung out in a sushi restaurant all day, eating sushi and telling people that sushi is disgusting and it sucks and they're stupid for liking it, people would probably think that I'm a fucking idiot. Thank you so much for checking out the video and the channel. If you liked what you saw, please consider subscribing and dropping a like. If you hated what you saw and you think I'm ugly or stupid or have a shitty hairline, please let me know in the comments and feel free to drop a dislike. I'll definitely take your comment super seriously. If you'd like to support the channel beyond the normal shit that every dude on YouTube asks you to do, please consider becoming a member for $1 a month. It gets you access to some behind the scenes stuff, and as the channel grows, that dollar is gonna get you more and more. One more time, thank you from the bottom of my heart. Please let me know what you think about Diablo 4 in the comments, and I'll catch you in the next one. Later. There's something to be said for a developer that listens and makes adjustments based on Flayer feedback? Jesus Christ. Normally I cuck. Donan is a former Haradrim and was part of a group of adventurers that Donan is a former Haradrim and was part of a group of adventurers that, wow, what the fuck? Donan is a former Haradrim and was part of a group of, fuck me, man.